G'day everybody, welcome back to a very special episode of the ESPN Footy Pod. Matt Walsh, Jake Michaels, ESPN's draft expert Jasper Chellappah, here to talk all things AFL Draft, of course, on Wednesday night. That's the 20th of November. Jake, good to be back in the studio with you. How's your little off-season break been?
It's great to be back. It's a weird feeling when you sit here after a couple of months. Since
Go through the motions, shake out the cobwebs?
Yeah, it might be a bit of a rusty episode, but no, it's good to be back.
Good thing you're not the focus, though.
Yeah, that's true. We've got the expert in here, but no, it's been a good little off-season period so far.
Yeah, I've been more invested in this draft, I think, than I have in previous drafts, Jasper, and you might be able to give us a bit of insight about this, because it does seem like one of the more highly anticipated ones, just because it's quite deep and there's going to be a lot of surprises, and maybe like the order in terms of who's going to be picking, or which club's going to be picking each player. We actually don't know a lot about that yet.
Yeah, there was a lot of interest generated, I think, over the trade period, because so many clubs were keen to get into this draft and not many were keen to get out. It made for really interesting trade discussions. That's why I think there's more interest from the general public in this one, as well as not even knowing who's going to be number one.
Yeah, I think
2 days out from the draft. I think that's fascinating stuff.
We haven't had that in quite a while.
2017, Cam Rayner, I want to say, is the last time where 2 days out we didn't quite know exactly who would be number one.
Yeah, because I think it was sort of fait accompli with Harley Reid, obviously, and then before that, sort of all these guys, Jason Horne-Francis, quite obvious choices. Yeah. But yeah, it kind of seems a bit more of a up in the air.
A few father sons as well floating around, which is always exciting to see. No, it should be good. It's always an enjoyable couple of nights, especially the first night when you got all the excited kids there and you get them up on the stage and with the jerseys.
I haven't asked you this yet. Are you going to be joining me at Marvel again?
I will be there.
I will be there.
Keep an eye on espn.com.au/AFL as well throughout the week. There's plenty more to come from Jasper. We've got one more Phantom draft to go. Will be a wrap up. There'll be a look ahead to next year's draft, a little early one next week. So do keep an eye on that as well. But today, we're going to be taking a broader look at the draft, then we'll nail down each club, looking at their selections, their needs, and their best fits for the night. I guess, firstly, the way that the night will work, it is split over 2 nights, so there'll be a first round on the Wednesday night, and then they'll do the rest on the Thursday, and then the rookie draft is after that as well.
Yeah, exactly. That's the third day, which starts at about 12 p.m. So it is, they've tried to extend it a little bit, a bit like the NFL draft, where it's more of an event now than it just being on the calendar. I would love it to be a little bit shorter, a bit closer to the trade period, because it does feel like it's been a long time between drinks for us.
Totally.
Seeing the trade period conclude, and then there's a lot of AFLW going on, and then we just want to get the AFL draft out of the way and get into W finals, in my opinion. That's what I would love. But
so you'd bring the draft,
ahead 2 or 3 weeks, I think. Yeah,
ideally, that'd be nice. Look, so a maximum of 92 selections, I guess, but clubs don't always take these. So you've got an indication of how many players will actually be selected.
So these are going to be 92, but there's going to be some rookie listed guys promoted onto the senior list. Those types of selections. The SSP, obviously, in the preseason, we've seen that really rise in the last few years. I think that we're a chance to see 70 plus for the first time since 2018, which is remarkable. It speaks to the depth and evenness of the pool, because list cuts happened over COVID, and over the last 4 drafts, we've seen 50 to 60 kind of picks be taken.
It felt like we were heading in that, we were trending down.
So last year there were 62-ish, and I think this year we could see 70 plus. Which would be remarkable, and it does speak to the depth of this draft.
Well, you talk about the depth, but it's not just at the top end. It's actually all the way through. It seems to be like you can get decent you can have a nice little punt at 50 or 60, and you might have a decent prospect on your hands.
Throw a blanket over them. But you have no real idea how they're going to turn out, obviously. But you're also going to have really interesting live trade scenarios, especially on the second night, where clubs are keen to get up the board because there's someone who's slid in their rankings, or there's someone who's bolted out of nowhere and is taken on the first night without really expecting to be taken there. I think that's the kind of situation we're going to see on the first 2 nights. It's going to be really interesting.
Well, you released a top 50 power rankings for us last week, and basically said it was really tough to keep it to 50 because there is that sort of blanket over that sort of 40 to 60 range, and a few players would have missed out. But as you say, you can kind of look at that whole group and that depth at that point of the draft.
Yeah.
And there's going to be players there.
I was asking to get a couple extra selections out of you, and
I said yes.
I know. And I was like, well, I just feel like I need to cut it to 50 here and do my job. But I think through 65-ish, I think everyone should be drafted in the top 65 of my power rankings that I have. And then obviously clubs will have sleepers. We saw Geelong take Lawson Humphreys out of the Waffle reserves last year as an example. So I think this will stretch out to 70.
So we often see, you get to the late 50s and 60s and on from there, and you see clubs passing on making a selection. Why is that? Now, obviously, you have to pay them. It's not free to have them on your list. But if there is so much upside and why don't they take that risk in previous drafts.
The difference in contract between a national list spot and a rookie list spot will be one, they want to take the rookie list spot instead of having them on the primary list. But also a lot of clubs these days, and you'll see it probably with Gold Coast, who will promote a rookie or two and take Leo Lombard. They're going to use these rookie lists to promote to the senior list instead of taking some additional players on in the draft.
Right.
Interesting stuff. Well, we'll get cracking. We'll go club by club. So if you do want to skip forward to your favourite team, feel free to do that as well. I mean, listen to the whole thing as well if you want. You'll probably get some good insight. But the Crows are first up, Jake. They were bottom 4 in 2024. Bit of a disappointment considering where they were in 2023, missing finals by a kick, 8 wins, 14 losses, and that draw, of course. But they've got pick 4 on the board. Pick 4, pick 64, and pick 78. So 3 selections. What do you think their biggest need is going into this draft? What's their immediate requirement?
Well, I think given where you said it, they finished bottom 4. There's obviously several holes that need to be plugged. I don't know if they can do them all this off season.
Yes.
The number one priority has to be midfield depth. I think we've seen Rory Sloane is gone. He's not there anymore. Ben Keys is playing his best footy as a forward. I don't know I think the experiment of him playing in the midfield, it might be over, given what we saw last year. I think they need to bolster what they've got in there and give some help to Jordan Dawson and Rory Laird, who is getting sneaky old as well. So I think they do need to get some midfield depth in there, and they should be able to do that with that pick 4.
Yeah, that's the conversation they'll be having. And I think it's speed in particular. We saw Rochelle didn't quite break in there. Rankin looked really good in there until injuries kind of curtailed his season. But I think he needs a running partner through the midfield with Jordan Dawson, Matt Crouch and Rory Laird. They're probably quite similar. And I think conversations over the off-season will be about replacing one of those with a youngster and pushing them out maybe to a halfback like Laird started his career. So I think Sid Draper as the South Australian would be at the top of their board, and they're going to have a really interesting decision to make there, because there's another kid that they're talking about and they've put a lot of work into in the last week in Jagger Smith. So these two I think will be fighting it out for their selection at number 4. The other interesting point that Adelaide has kind of reached out to North Melbourne at pick 2 and seen if they can slide up the order and grab their guy ahead of Carlton at pick 3.
Because the Blues have been interested in Draper as well. And they've got track records of taking kids out of South Australia and making sure they don't want to go home. So is there that risk that the Blues might try and pip them and then the Crows will have to try and pay extra to get up to 2 and then take that?
Yeah, well, that's why the Crows should be worried about it, because the Blues have been sniffing around. They flew Michael Voss over to South Australia to meet with Sid last week. So I think that this is a deal that could happen. They've offered 2 future thirds to North Melbourne to slide up those 2 spots. North Melbourne wants a future second. I don't know if Adelaide's willing to pay that, and that's probably what's going to stop the deal from happening on draft night, but it is a live trade possibility at number 2.
So not to jump too far ahead to North Melbourne, but we think we know where the number 1 pick's going to go. So spoiler alert, we do think it might be Sam Lawler who goes to Richmond with that pick number 1.
Yeah.
Pick number 2 is a bit of an interesting one, because will other clubs come for who you think North will go for? So Alex Taru, is that how you say the name? He's on that board potentially as a number 2 pick. He's a key position, a big tall guy. Do other clubs want that? Could they not just wait and slide those 2 picks and give it to Adelaide?
It's North.
Yeah, is there a risk that North will miss out on the player they want if they do slide
down
to 4?
a couple of spots?
That's what's become increasingly more probable about North Melbourne if they want Alex Taru, is that interest has come heavy for him through Melbourne, St Kilda, Richmond. These clubs are still in the top 10
but they don't
later
need to slide that far down.
So you don't want to slide that far down if you want that player in particular.
So it could be a win-win, because I don't think the Blues at 3 are going to be going for a key position.
You can almost guarantee they're taking a midfielder.
Yeah.
So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with that trade. Adelaide in particular there, I don't think they need to, because they're going to get one of Jagger or Sid at 4 if North Melbourne goes with the key tall, which we expect to be Alex Taru, if they choose to go down that direction. Later on, they've got a father-son in the name of Tyler Welsh, who was rated probably in my top 20 at the start of the year. He slid down the board a little bit. He's a bit undersized, but I think with Logan Morris coming into the Brisbane team, you saw that those types can really impact straight away as a third tall if they're not the main man up there. So I think that Tyler Welsh will be a good pickup for them. He'll be taken in the national draft by Adelaide.
So a bit later on. Talk to us, just before we move on from the Crows, a little bit more about Draper and a little bit more about Jagger Smith. Jagger Smith was number 1 in your power rankings. Doesn't mean he's going to go number 1, but he's your number 1 man.
Well, they sat at 1 and 2, I think, for the last 6 months, basically. They're 1A, 1B for me. It's very difficult to split them. I'm taking probably the floor of Jagger Smith over probably the ceiling of Sid Draper. And what I love about Jagger is his ability to accumulate, but also damage with the ball. He's not a guy who racks up the ball 35 times and goes sideways and backwards. He can push the ball up the ground. He's really good at going from the inside to the outside of contest with the zip, and he looks a little bit like Zach Butters with the way he can snake through traffic and then really push out the front of contest, which I love. I think he's going to grow and grow and grow at the next level. He's a professional kid. He captained Vic Metro, so I think there's a lot of upside for what he can do. And he's just he's safe as houses. You can't miss on this prospect, in my opinion. He's going to be a bona fide midfielder at the next level. Sid Draper, I think there's a lot of Chad Warner in the way that he explodes. He's more, if he takes the ball with him on the way out of contest, you can't catch him.
Yep.
He's agile, he's evasive, he loves to take on the game, he draws opponents and lobs them over and tries to get the ball back and link play through that kind of transition. So I just think that those types of damaging midfielders is what clubs are really searching for. They're 181, 182 centimetres. I'm not worried about that height at all. I think some of the best midfielders in the game right now are that kind of height. That doesn't worry me whatsoever.
Totally. So looks like the Crows, despite being in that pick 4 range, have a shot at getting one of the best players in the draft. Still.
Absolutely.
One of the top 2. Lions, premiers last year, Jake. So obviously...
This year, I believe.
Sorry, this year. Last season, this year. Hey, I'm rusty as well. 14, 8 and 1. And they've stacked the back end of, I guess, their draft hand because they know they're going to have to be matching bids. Obviously, well, they have needs, but they're going to come and get Levi Ashcroft. So it doesn't really matter what they need.
They're going to get Levi Ashcroft, and I'll let Jasper talk about Levi and what he's seen from him. But I don't. There's a player that I don't know they're going to be able to cover, and it's Joe Danaher. And I think that'll be. I'm fascinated to see how they go early part of next season without him. So valuable, and I think as great as Lachie Neale is, and you can name 5 other players, I think Danaher is just about the last player they could afford to lose, given what he does. 16 disposals, 2 goals per game last year.
Yep.
Like Jeremy Cameron, the only other player in the league that did that.
Right.
And I don't know if they can cover him right now with what they've got. And obviously that sounds ridiculous given they just won the flag, but he is a huge loss. Now, Levi Ashcroft is coming through the door. Is there a way that they can get someone to not cover Joe Danaher, but to, I guess, the next sort of 10 years to someone that could come in and play a key position role down the line?
Their picks are going to be very late. They currently have 27, 34, 42, 43, 49, 58. That's enough to basically match a bid for Levi if it comes at 1, but then not to take their other academy prospect in midfielder, Sam Marshall, who played alongside Levi at the Sandy Dragons. He was best on ground in the Coast Talent League Grand Final. He's a gun in his own right. It will be bid on in the first night. So they've kind of hamstrung themselves into having to take these 2 midfielders, which might not be what their list needs is, but it's still such a blessing
they
to
can't
have those available.
Do you think, just on Levi, do you think there's a chance he could be the pick 1 and they would have to match that?
Richmond, they haven't come out and said it yet. In my opinion, they won't be taking Levi Ashcroft with a bid at pick 1. They'll be taking their player outright.
They generally don't do it, right?
It's you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, because you don't want to, I guess, get a club offside later on if you need to trade with them the next year or whatever it might be.
Also, you're competing with each other. I've always found it a bit strange that we see these players. It's like, why are they sliding when they wouldn't in any other circumstance?
Yeah, it's a fair call, and when you know that they're going to match a bid on them. In my opinion, I think
make them pay what they're worth.
Richmond probably have Sam Lawler at number 1 though, overall. So they're making a decision based on their big board and where they have Levi Ashcroft ranked. If this is not at number 1, then don't bid on him.
Don't bid on him. Yeah. That's fair enough. Okay, so they're going to be obviously Levi. Tell us a bit about his game and maybe how it compares to his brother Will as well.
He's a bit shorter, more stockier. He's got that Lachie Neale kind of really thick calves, tree trunk kind of legs.
Talking Jake's language here.
Yeah, he stands up in tackles. But he's also got this ability to go forward and hit the scoreboard. So he played as a 15-year-old in the Coast Talent League, which is extraordinary in its own right. He won a flag and was an incredible contributor 3 years ago. But he played up forward because Will Ashcroft, Harry Sheasel, these types were running through the midfield. So he is now got this forward nous to his game that Will never really did. Will obviously won the Norm Smith medal. He's an absolute superstar in his own right. But Levi's added dimension to be able to go forward and probably start his career in the forward line and be able to contribute in that way. I think will be really beneficial for the Lions, who probably don't have a midfield spot for him right now. He's obviously going to graduate into that midfield role, but he's more of that inside ball winner and then go forward, hit the scoreboard, whereas Will, that transition running, link run out of congestion, I think is his strong suit.
Putting you on the spot a little bit here, but fast forward 15 years, who's had the better career?
I loved Will in his draft year. I have Levi at 3 this year. I think I'd have Will at 1 overall this year based on his draft. I think he has superstar qualities that we've already seen coming off an ACL to win a Norm Smith medal.
Incredible.
Within a year. It's just ridiculous.
So the note I had for Brisbane is maybe some more ball use off halfback. Could be a list need to fill. Is one of those guys, either Levi or Sam Marshall, you talk about not having midfield spots.
Yeah.
Is there spots there that they could possibly slide into?
Yeah,
Do they have that kind of nous?
Really good point on Sam Marshall, who played a little bit of running defender last year. He's more of an outside midfielder, so I think it really works for him to graduate into that spot. Kitty Coleman's obviously coming back, but we saw what they did with Jasper Fletcher, who was a bona fide midfielder. They chucked him on a wing, and he became this grand final winning wingman. And I think Sam Marshall can do something similar off half-back if the need presents.
Interesting. The Blues. So interestingly, during the trade period, they traded up. They wanted to get inside the top 3, and they've got pick 3 as it stands at the moment. They were 8th last year, so just scraped into finals. Obviously, injuries hurt, but 13 and 10. You probably think they underperformed, but they did have the injuries. They've got the pick 3, as I said, 38, 63, 68, 69, and 71. Jake, obviously they've got some picks there for the Camporelli twins later in the draft, but they also have some needs. Where are they?
Yeah, look, I think we've spoken about this ad nauseum on this podcast throughout the year, particularly with Christian as well, and an area that Carlton just has to address, and we've been saying it for a while, it's the lack of pace through the midfield. Yeah. It's just, we call it one pace, slow, whatever you want to call it, but Patrick Cripps, he is a superstar. He might be the best player in the league. If he's not quick, you got guys like George Hewitt.
You had Matt Kennedy. Walsh isn't terribly fast.
Walsh is a good runner, but he's not fast. You need just a line breaker through the midfield, and I think there was a thought a couple of years ago that Zach Williams might be that guy coming in to be able to do that, but he hasn't been able to play. He hasn't been able to stay healthy, but he hasn't been able to play in them.
Potentially.
So, Sard nice off half back, but I think through the midfield, a bit more of an attacking weapon. I think that's what the Blues are desperately looking for.
So you said Draper was high up on that board. Obviously, Voss went and had a chat with them in South Australia. But are there other players you could see landing at Carlton?
Yeah, so Michael Voss went and had a chat to Sid's family over... I think that's a pretty good indication that he's right in the mix.
Totally.
It might also be a contingency plan because the number one on their board, in my opinion, will be Finn O'Sullivan. I think that's who they're going to select if he's available.
Yep.
What Finn brings, he's a second cousin of Sam Walsh, who has a different game. So he brings an aerial element to his game and the transition running. Offensively and defensively, he's a powerful runner. He's got some burst out of stoppage. He's a little bit of Isaac Heaney when he floats forward because he can mark above his head. He's only 182 centimetres, but he plays a lot taller than that. And I think that there's probably scope for him to start outside the centre square if need be before coming in. He's just had a wretched run with injury. I think across, when you canvass recruiters at the start of the year, they were probably thinking Finn O'Sullivan will be the number one pick. And now he's probably going to drop to 3, maybe even later if Carlton don't go that way. And that's mostly because he's just had a wretched run with injuries, inconsistent form. He played one game at Richmond VFL level where he was really good. But other than that, I think he'd be really disappointed in his campaign.
Are these unlucky injuries or are these, repeat injuries?
No, they're not soft tissues or anything like that. There's no concussion symptoms at all. It's a thumb, a finger, a hip.
Luck.
It's just really unlucky with a couple of things. It's just breaking on contact and it's just been a wretched run.
If we think we know where Richmond's going, we'll get there shortly, and you've spoken about Sid Draper and Jagger Smith as two guys that you feel pretty high floors, hard to miss with either of them. Why wouldn't the Blues go for whichever one falls to them at 3?
The upside of Finn's really interesting, and I think they've done a lot of work on him over the last 2 years, not just this year. As a junior in the under-16s, he was probably far and away the most exciting player at that level, and that's probably why they were considering him and trading up with the idea of him in mind.
Yeah.
That's also why they're canvassing their options with Sid Draper, and I think Jagger Smith is also in the mix if he's available, because they're not quite sure what Finn's going to be at the next level either. No one really is. He's not a huge winner of the football, so if he's only winning it 18 times a game, it's going to be tough to be a pick 3 level talent.
So you said there's a bit of an unknown about that and the ability at the next level and the staying fit and all that kind of stuff. Whereas you've already said there are some bona fides, absolute can't misses in this. So maybe that's where I guess clubs are like, well, there are 3 other can't miss or won't miss players, maybe potentially later in the draft where you go, maybe it's just not worth the risk. Who knows? The Camporelli twins, so the Blues are going to probably get those guys as well through the door. They were probably a bit more highly rated earlier in the season as well, but maybe just slid a little bit down the pack.
Yeah, so cast your mind 12 months back with the grand final curtain raiser. Ben Camporelli, amongst this host of draft prospects, was best on ground in that game as an inside midfielder. He had a really dominant season overall for Glenelg and for SA as well at the Carnival. It's just that recruiters, every time I speak to them, they have knocks on his kicking, his ability outside of the contest. He's probably got that really strong one-wood in winning the contested ball, getting it going forward. Doesn't quite have the foot skills to match that as a midfielder. I think there's a lot to like about him, though. I have him mid-30s. I think that's a bit higher than what recruiters will have, and probably a bit higher than where the bid will come on the second night. I think it probably comes in the 40s. And then they'll probably take Lucas Camporelli with their last pick in the national draft if he makes it all the way through. He's more of a wingman who's got some more skills, really courageous, running back with the flight of the ball. Everything you kind of want from your wingman, I think he can bring.
Do you see them playing next year?
I see them playing a lot of VFL football, to be perfectly honest, in their first season, especially if there's no injuries in the Carlton midfield, touch wood. But I think that Ben needs to develop his kicking to become an AFL midfielder.
Plenty of options on the wing for the Blues.
Plenty of Blues need to develop their kicking, I would have thought.
Moving down the list, so the Pies, bit of an interesting draft hand. So 52, 55, 60, 66 and 82. This is after they finished 9th, obviously winning the premiership the year before that. But 12, 9 and 2 draws. They were kind of the latest premier to fall out of the 8. So they're looking for a way to get back in there. Where do you think they need to look, Jake?
Well, I think what you think the Pies need, it depends on how you rate Tim Membry.
It's a good,
What do we think we're going to get out of Tim Membry this year? Well, next
45
year, I should
goals?
say. If they can get 45 goals out of Tim Membry, then I think they'll obviously take that, but then they don't need to look immediately at filling that hole.
But you're not going to fill it with a draftee anyway, right?
You're not, but they're going to have to take it forward at some stage to look for the future. But I think it's just sort of building around Nick Dacos in the middle. I know it's the midfield again, but games are won and lost in the midfield, and you don't want to get to the point where you've just got Nick in the middle and not much else. And I think that's where they've really got to try and bolster that midfield. Yeah, absolutely.
I think Collingwood's been very open about not really caring about the AFL draft, and they're coming into the draft at pick 52. So Fly was right when he, came in ahead of the trade period and said, we're trying to trade our picks and we're trying to get in ready-made talent and win another flag. They're surrounding, Nick Dacos with as much talent as they can right now. They've been hamstrung.
Isn't it enough? Is it that? That's my worry.
I didn't think it was enough in 2023.
Yeah, I get that, but I think the players that were there, they're just a couple of years older. We're not going to have Scott Pendlebury and Steele Sidebottom and Jack Crisp, and they're getting older. So they're not going to be there in 2-3 years' time.
There are two mature ages that I think they will have a look at. One is Riley Bice, who won a flag with Werribee in the VFL. He's more of a half-back, a replacement for John Noble, I want to say. Oleg Markov was delisted. I think they need a bit more run, especially with their game plan off half-back, and he has beautiful foot skills. So I probably liken him a bit to Jaden Short with his ability to use his leg as a real weapon and then push up the ground and kind of help force the ball up forward. And Sam Davidson was the Round Mitchell Fothergill medalist who, obviously they all get picked up in that AFL, and I think he'll go in the national draft. He's more of that Ollie Henry type third tall up forward who can fly for his marks and kicks goals in a variety of ways. I think they could use a type like that. They've tried Jeremy Howe up forward. He can play a little bit above his size at 190 centimetres.
When you add Dan Houston down to that back line, you can probably have a bit of a play maybe with someone like Howe as well, if it works. Because I think it does work pretty well when he does go there, for sure.
So how do you actually, just slightly off topic, but how do you look at the Pies list right now in terms of where they are going into next season? Do you think with what they have, because they're not really going to be getting much from the draft, clearly, that's going to help them next year. Do you think they can contend? Or do you think what we saw the year before was the anomaly?
I find it really interesting because my theories about finishing your season earlier and then having to play another 5 weeks of footy, and you get 5 weeks less of a pre-season when you're the Premier, and you find that they're dropping out a bit. I feel like an extra month off is going to help with a lot of these guys. And yeah, few of the stars are older, but they are getting more out of guys like Dacos, and they're going to bring in guys like Houston and Membry, as you say, and it'd be good for a few goals. You can joke all you want, but he will. So I think I'm bullish on him. I'm bullish on him making finals.
If Tim Membry can play 20 games, he's going to kick 35 goals.
Yeah, I could see him making finals.
The Pies had the shortest turnaround in AFL history off their flag. I know Brisbane did as well. They won the premiership, but they also came home like a steam train, and they looked like they were going to make some noise in finals if they got there. They didn't quite make it because their start was piss poor. But they've also gone and got the best player on the trade market in Dan Houston. I think that's an incredible coup from considering where their draft hand was. They're not going to get anything to really help contend this year, but I think there are a couple key forwards that could help. Josh Murphy does have that Logan Morris quality as a third tall who kicked a lot of goals at the Coach Talent League level, like Logan did last year. I think he'll be available in the 50s. And then Charlie Nichols as well is more of a rangy type out of SA who I think has a lot of developmental talent to tap. I think that he's probably going to take 3 or 4 years.
Sure.
Collingwood doesn't like doing that, but that's something that they could do.
Pies, very interesting, even though they don't have, I guess, the high picks, so to speak. The Dons also going to be holding on to picks because they'll need to be matching bids. So 11th last year, 11 wins, 11 losses, 1 draw, so 1-1.
Perfectly
It's like,
mediocre.
it's like
Yeah.
my Max Gordon stat.
Yeah. Look, another bright start, but struggled sort of towards the back end, which has been a bit of a trend, I guess you could sort of say. Jake, if you had to look at the Dons list, where do they need to be looking?
Be interested to get your thoughts on this, but I think that moving on from Jake Stringer showed what they were about and showed where they wanted to take this club. And I think bringing in players, I don't know what it is they need. I think they need a lot of things, but I think it's clear that they're going to be targeting players that are AFL ready, mature bodies, and I think ideally getting those that can play mid into the forward line is where they need to be looking.
So it's almost lucky, I guess, that they are linked heavily with an NGA Academy prospect.
He'd be the number one type of player that they should be targeting in the draft. So they get Isaac Kako through the NGA, which is a stroke of good fortune because the rules were changed halfway through the season, as the AFL loves doing. So they get him through the door regardless of where the bid comes.
Yes.
And they've made the trade with Melbourne to trade out of pick 9, accumulate the points further back in the draft order to make sure that they can match a bid wherever it comes. I think it's still more likely to come after 9 than before 9, so they probably could have held on to the selection and done that in a different way. But I love that they've earmarked him, guaranteed his selection to the Dons, got that out of the way, and then they can try and work out what they can do with 2 future first rounders and see if they can get back into the ball.
So this hand, 28, 31, 40, 46, 53, 54 and 65. Talk to us a little bit about what Kako can bring to the Dons, I guess. Will he be playing straight away as that forward sort of option?
Yeah, I think so. He's an excitement machine. If you cast your mind back to 12 months ago with Nick Watson, we were talking about how he was undersized at 175 centimetres. We didn't know if he could impact straight away. That was proved completely incorrect. He was incredible during the final series, and even when he was missing goals at the start of the year, he was getting 3 to 4 shots on goals every week, which was incredible for his size. That's exactly what they're getting in Kako, is ability to impact in the forward half through winning free kicks, through bursting through stoppage, crumbing packs, taking marks above his head at his size. He's great on the lead as well. And he can go up a little bit more around the ground and impact in the middle as well. So he might take a little bit of time to develop his all-round skill set, but as a pure small forward, I think that's really exciting.
Anything else on their board for later on?
So if Kako's bid comes later on, they're probably going to trade out of pick 28 because they don't need it, and they can probably trade into the future, try and get back in on the first night in some capacity.
Yeah.
So I think there'll be a few suitors. They're well poised to match the bid for Kako, so they'll be working it out wherever on draft night. That D's future first will be on the table to get back in on the first night and pick up another player. I think if they do, Job Shanahan, who played in the Eston VFL, he's a key forward, kicked a lot of goals throughout the year. I think he will be right on the board. He's probably going to go in the teens.
Okay.
Taj Hodden's a really interesting one. They've been linked to him and interviewed him a couple of times throughout the year. He started the season on fire for the Sandy Dragons, but probably forgotten about because he did his ACL in round 5 during training.
So he won't be available for probably till the second half of the season.
Yeah, clubs aren't expecting him to play next year in full. And then Joe Berry is a half forward as well. I think would add a lot of foot skill going inside 50. That's exactly what he can do as a half forward. I think realistically they're going to match a bit on Kako at around pick 12 to 15, try and get back in, but they probably won't be able to because it's such a deep draft and clubs aren't willing to trade out of it.
Totally.
And then match a pick on a bid on their NGA prospect in Jaden Ewan, who was a dashing defender out of Calder as well. So I think they'll get those 2 through the door and then take another pick probably in the 30s, wherever that bid lines up, and it'll be interesting to see who's available at that point.
Fascinating. Yeah, Don's another interesting case, that's for sure. The Dockers, so 10th, missed out on finals, 12 wins, 10 losses and the 1 draw. Made it in 2023, but couldn't back it up again this year. So there's a lot to like about Fremantle, and I think about this all the time. There's a lot to like about them, but they do obviously just have their deficiencies and can't put wins on the board as often as they would like. They've got picks 14, then 30, 67, 81 and 89. Jake, where are you looking for the Dockers?
Call me crazy, but the more I think about it with Freo, I think they're a side that I think they can take a big leap next year.
I agree. Yeah.
I think I really think I would not be surprised if they finish 4th next year.
Yeah.
They've got their midfield looks set, young and set, reliable backline. They got a pretty strong draft hand as well. So I think if I'm Freo, I want to be targeting players that can help right now. Where do you think they need the most help? What area of the ground? Is it the forward line still probably the...
They need to kick a winning score.
That's
the biggest thing for me. They're incredible defensively and they win enough ball through the middle with Sarong, Brayshaw, Hayden Young. I believe that they just need to kick a winning score, get some help around Josh Tracy and Jai Amos, who are both young still. Tracy took a huge leap forward, but they need some...
How much would their natural development from year to year help with that, forgetting bringing anyone else in? Do you think you still don't think it's going to be enough to make much of a difference?
Yeah, if they go to splitting most contests that they're in, then you're going to pile up the wins by having someone at their feet, in my opinion. So that's where a guy like Joe Berry comes in, who I just spoke about with Eston. He's that half forward who's a beautiful kick for goal. He's a beautiful kick around ground. He can impact in the midfield.
So he's a link player as well.
Exactly right. Yeah. He works hard up and down the ground and crumbs well. So I think that they'll be heavily interested in him at pick 14. They've had this kid under their nose the entire year, and he won a waffle flag with Peel Thunder, their affiliate, at the waffle level. So Bo Allen, I think if he's available at pick 14, they'll snap him up. I don't think he will be.
So the Eagles have pick 12. And if they want to look West Australian as well, they could also look towards
They could also be looking towards him as well. We'll chat about that a little bit later. But I think that he will be right in their frame as a guy who can impact straight away. A physical body. He's already played against the men and he doesn't look out of place whatsoever. More half-back, on-ball, midfield, inside presence who's got great athletic attributes, but probably doesn't have the skill as the top 10 in my prospects. So I think that he can impact straight away. It's just probably not exactly what they need in terms of the type of player, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So you're probably looking at forward half, and then maybe if he's still on the board, you go, well, we'll take him because he's a local prospect, shows a lot, and has those, I guess, that sort of leadership
I think they'll be really
capability,
keen
right?
on him, yeah.
I think their drafting's been pretty good in recent years for her, so trust me to make the right decision.
One to watch. Anything later on in the draft that's worth looking at? Any links or potential ideas of what they might look?
They've nominated father-son Jaron Carr, which will be interesting to see what happens on draft night. I think there's a decent chance that he makes it through the national draft, and then they can list him as a category B rookie on the rookie list.
Yeah. Easy. Yeah, good to look forward to. Another father-son at the Cats. Well, obviously they got Bailey Smith in, so they've spent a lot of their draft capital. 45, 57, 74, 84. They were 15 and 8 in 2024, third. And they just fell short of the prelim hurdle. They just continue to perform and keep putting up numbers. And as I said, bring in one of the more, I guess, highly rated midfielders who's, again, coming off an injury himself, an ACL. But where do you think the Cats need to add to? I almost hate to ask. But.
Well, so far, you can't not look at this off-season and not say it's a success.
So I think
to bring in Bailey Smith, 100%. So I still think, even with Bailey Smith, I still think the area is clearly the midfield probably still needs the help because Patrick Dangerfield isn't going to be there for that much longer. I think they do need to get more talent through that midfield. Can they do it in this draft given where they'll
45 is their earliest pick?
It's going to be interesting. They'll always target mature ages. They did Sean Manor last year, which was a revelation throughout the finals, which is where you want him to impact. And he did that, and I think that's a place that they can go back to. Riley Bison, Sam Davidson, two guys I've already spoken about. I think that they will go in the national draft. Geelong's a great suitor for them. Collingwood's also a great suitor for them. I think they usually target Falcons players, and there's a couple that I think would really, really work well. Xavier Ivasic is the Falcons captain through the Coates Talent League, and he had a really good campaign. It's just flown under the radar as an inside ball winner who I think can impact stoppages, but also has a big kick and can get out and move the ball forward and meters gained kind of a player. I think that he will be available late in the piece, maybe even the rookie draft, and he'll be one that they are looking at a fair bit. And then Lockie Jacks as well is a half-back, very, very fast runner. They did Lawson Humphreys last year. I think if they do it again, they'd have their halfbacks for the next decade kind of set because he's a very reliable player who can impact straight away.
Yeah, Cats, interesting. That mature age sort of link, I guess, as well, and the Falcons as well. One to keep an eye on. So something I've noticed, I guess, we're nearly almost halfway through, I guess, these clubs, but not a lot of talk about key position players yet. Is that what you're finding, is that it's a lot more midfield heavy towards the top end?
100%. And I think clubs are potentially going to fall into the trap of taking a key forward early because he's the first one available.
Sure.
Whereas maybe last year he would have been the fifth best key forward available. They're taking them early because he is the only one that they would really be looking at that point. I think it's just a midfield-dominated draft.
So sometimes a lot of it's timing, right? So
Absolutely.
If you need a key, you can overpay in times when you need one, as opposed to
it's the same as the trade.
Yeah,
period,
you get lucky with we need midfielders and there's a lot available.
Yep.
So. Yeah.
So I guess who would be the top key position prospect, I guess, before we move on to the next club? But who would be the top key position prospect, and where's the first ruckman going to be taken? I mean, can you give us an insight as to big men in this pool?
Alex Taru I have as the best key position. He's only 193 centimetres, but he plays like a key position player, more of an intercept off half back, and can also impact up forward. So a bit of a swingman in that role. He's linked at pick 2. That's how interested in North Melbourne is in the best key position talent in this draft. So maybe it's a reach for them, but I also have him in my top 10. That's where he's landed in the end. Harry Armstrong, Job Shanahan, the Whitlock twins, Jack and Matt, I think they've come in similar to the Kings and the Mackays in terms of being very wiry, underdone, going to take a few years. But I think if everything goes right, they're going to hit their straps and be that kind of force in this league. Yep. And then, there's a couple really injured ones who have flown under the radar, Noel Moraz and Harry O'Farrell, these key position types who I think will be more second round, second night prospects.
Interesting. All right, Suns is the next club that we're going to speak about. So Gold Coast have picks 39, 41, 51 and 61, but there's a good reason that they have slid so far back, and that's because, of course, they're going to need to be probably matching a bid on a guy called Leo Lombard.
This kid is the most underrated player in the pool. If he doesn't go in the top 10, it will be a travesty. Jake, he's probably the best athlete to come through the AFL pathways in years. He had a top...
So how does that happen then? How does he slide down and how does he get underrated?
Well, clubs forget about them. They're not on the big board because
you can't
Gold Coast is...
They're going to match bids regardless.
Gold Coast will match the bid regardless, so they just forget about how good he can be. They don't interview them, they don't meet the family, that kind of stuff that goes into assessing draft prospects. They don't really do that with the academy kids, especially on the Gold Coast where they're almost guaranteed to land at the Suns. Yep. So Leo Lombard, he had a top 5 sprint time all time at the Combine. He had a top 10 agility test all time at the Combine. He is this forward half, powerful, speedy mid forward who can impact straight away. I think 178 centimetres, so a bit more barrel chested and smaller. Lower centre of gravity, agile. He loves a fend off. He's powerful. He gets into the face of the opposition. I absolutely adore him.
I love the lower centre of gravity. It's what I never use for short people, but it's a good one. But it's what I've got written down, right, for what they need. It was an Isaac Rankin replacement. Yeah. Now I don't know if he plays the exact way to Isaac, but they needed something. Someone with a bit of X factor, someone who can make things happen. Yeah. Because they've been just a bang average team for too long. They need
11 and 12 last year, couldn't win on the road.
Yeah. They couldn't win on the road, but they
could beat us on the road.
Yeah. So I think that's the kind of play they need. And if you're, is he? I mean, quite clearly, it seems like he's going to be able to come in and impact from round one.
He won a premiership with Gold Coast in the VFL as a 16-year-old last year. He has batted above his average the entire way through the junior process. He's got to the stage where he won the Lark medal at the Carnival as the best player at the national championships. That's how good he is.
If he didn't have the ties to the Suns, where would he be going? Would he be a top 3 player in this draft?
Well, I've landed at 6 for him, just behind Finn O'Sullivan. I think he just needs to be a top 10 pick, in my opinion.
Yeah. So we had a yarn go viral earlier in the year on Leo Lombard by Jasper, which was basically sort of talking about how his links and his father was an ex-MMA player. So there's a lot of pedigree there and a lot of interest, I guess, amongst the public, but clearly not amongst the clubs because they just can't get him.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how that happens. GWS, they are next on the list. So they finished 4th in 2024, 15 and 8. They collapsed in a heap in both finals, though. Straight sets, the mental scarring might take some getting over, Jake. And I guess if you're close but not quite there, there's somewhere where you need to improve. And where would you say the Giants need to take strides in the off-season?
Well, we asked the hypothetical 3 or 4 times. Are the Giants premiers if they don't blow that lead against the Lions? Maybe. So I don't think they need to panic too much. A bit like Sydney as well. I don't think there needs to be this huge overcorrection and panic just because of what happened. It's a final. It's not the Premier League where it's the whole season. Anything can happen.
They've got draft capital now as well.
They do.
So 15, 16, 21. So, all pretty early. Then 37, 56,
it's a great
and 73.
Draft,
yeah, and I think what it has to be is the area in which they are older is in the midfield. And I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I think it's that midfield. It's getting ahead of the game and getting the next wave of midfielders to come in. Canelio, Callie, Callan Ward, we want to bring the next wave through. So by the time they're gone, the others are hitting their straps.
Who's the third for Tom Green and Finn Callahan? Yeah. Who's next to them over the next decade is probably where I'd be looking. And that probably brings, with 3 first rounders, 15, 16, 21, they have the opportunity to trade into next year's draft if they want. But I think they should be targeting the upside swings of a guy like Taj Hodden, who will miss the season, but has the top 5, 10 kind of potential of this draft pool. He plays a little bit like Harry Sheezel, in my opinion. He's a kind of mercurial in the forward half, but also can impact and win a lot of ball on ball. So I would love to see them target him. They haven't traditionally targeted Vic Metro prospects over the last few years. I think they've taken 1 out of the last 12 national draft picks have come from the Vic Metro region. But I think Taj Houghton could change that this year. Joe Berry, we've spoken about with Fremantle. I think that he's a red hot chance if he slides to GOS's picks at 15, 16, 21. I don't think that's going to happen though. There's a lot of interest in him in the early teens. Xavier Lindsay, I think, is the Gippsland Power captain who's got this balance as an offensive, defensive, beautiful ball user through the midfield. I think would suit them really well. And then I reckon that they're looking at the possibility of Lekalia not being there anymore after this season.
Interesting.
Getting offers from other clubs that will probably be really big. I think they would look at Noel Mraz and the Jack and Matt Whitlock as well as key defensive types.
Interesting. Yeah, Giants, those they got a bit of flexibility there around that sort of 15 to 21 range where they got those 3 picks. So looking forward to what they
do.
Can
And
do.
they're going to be in the mix again next year. Absolutely.
Very much so. The Hawks did a lot of their off-season moves in the trade period and free agency. So obviously added Barris and Battle to that defence, which really helps.
They're the best defence in the league now. If James Sicily continues to play as a defender, do they have the best defence in the league?
It's up there. I mean, to be honest, for a team that finished 7th but came home like a house on fire, and now looking at what they've done already with their list, I'm not worried. Worried is not the right word. I'm excited for them. I'm worried as an opposition fan about what they'll be able to do and how quickly they've been able to bounce back. I guess it's not been quick. It's been a process. But for it all to come together so quickly and for them to get into finals and win a final and then come so close in a semi,
the thing that we just mustn't forget is for 5 months they were the best team in football by a long way.
It was a long part of the season.
Yeah, it wasn't like for 5 weeks. It was for the majority of the year. They had that really slow start, injuries, and then it all just came together. Credit to Sam Mitchell, the whole staff really. What do they need?
Well,
what do they need? So we just touched on the backline. The backline looks as set as anything. The midfield, we've spoken about it all year. They have one of the best young midfield cores. And this was, we saw some of those key pieces not play as much as we hope to see them play next year. I think it's the forward line, right?
Yeah.
So the forward line is where they've got a target. Jack Gunston, Mabior Chol, these guys are not players that are going to be like it's done. We need to find replacements and we need to find guys. But the one player that we do forget about is Mitch Lewis. Hasn't played footy in so long. We just never played more than 15 games in a season.
Yeah. Well, then can you be relied on?
Can he be reliable? So maybe he can't be, but we need someone else that can be there, and I guess you hope that he can play.
So pick 33 is where they enter this draft, and then they've got 70 and 75. You talked about there being maybe more key prospects towards the back end of it. Is there someone around that 33 range you can sort of see landing at the Hawks?
Yeah, speaking to rival clubs, Tom Sims continually comes up in talks, and he's a Vic Metro, probably the best Vic Metro key forward outside of Harry Armstrong coming through this year. That 199 centimetres, long levers, can really high point the ball and kicks a lot of goals from around the 50-metre arc. He's got a long kick on him. He runs hot and cold. That's the big issue with him, that he's probably inconsistent. But so was Cal Shadir last year at this point, and he was a revelation. He kicked 25 goals in a final side, and he needs a running mate. And I think Tom Sims probably would be the choice at 33 if he was available at that point. That probably blows out to 37, 38.
Sure.
But
he came in 47 on your rankings, and you said that he ticks a lot of boxes, but there's a lot of work that he still needs to do. And I think when you're a 17, 18-year-old at 199 centimetres, that's second. That's pretty general.
Enough, yeah.
But you see the makings of something there.
Absolutely. I think he needs to be drafted. He will be drafted in the national draft. We just need to see what he becomes, and that probably starts from the VFL next year. There's a couple others. Charlie Nichols we spoke about with Collingwood, and then Kale Duran I absolutely adore. I think I have him at 21 or 22 on my rankings, but he's not going to feature until the second night. That's almost a guarantee. He's got beautiful balances, this 199 centimetre prospect who's mostly played in the ruck. I think his future is up forward. If he can clunk pack marks, if he can kick accurately for goal, he's got everything else. He's a beautiful user of his right and left. He moves across the ground beautifully. He's a top 10 agility test time at 199 centimetres in the combine, which is remarkable. I don't think I've ever seen a big do that. So he's got some special traits. I would just love to see it all unlocked to the right club, and Hawthorn would be that right club.
It's interesting, you were talking about sort of low centres of gravity. The descriptor I've got here is he's a top-heavy frame, so it's actually the opposite. The Ds. We talked about the Ds and their draft haul. So they've got, well, after a bit of a tumultuous year, to be fair, 11-12, finished 14th. They've got picks 5, 9 and 79. So 5 and 9 are there, and they are just dangling like carrots of being able to transform that side and see the next generation of Ds coming through.
They have to, really. I mean, the bottom could fall out of this side very, very quickly, and I think they've got to go into this draft maybe not assuming that Clayton Oliver or Christian Petrarca aren't going to be there in 12 or 24 months, but they've got to find their replacements, because if they do go, or one of them goes, it's going to get really ugly if it's not already. And I think that has to be the target. Once again, you got picks, high-end picks, you've got to target the midfield talent.
Yeah, midfield talent. And I think, we've talked about their key forward prospects. It remains a list hole for them, but you're not going to get that kind of immediate gratification. So I think you've got to go for the midfield, right?
I think so. That's their first port of call. Credit to the recruiting team. They're not part of the list management side of things, but they've recruited really well over the last few years. They've made sure through this period of success, they're still getting their first rounders in the door. So they still have, they got 2 last year in Colton Tholstrup and Caleb Windsor. They've got Matt Jefferson waiting in the wings in the VFL developing. So they've got some talent coming through, and they're almost in a mini rebuild period right now where they've finished nearly in the bottom 4. They finished, 5th last, and they've got another pick that they've traded up to grab off Essendon in pick 9. So they know exactly where they're at. They don't want the bottom to fall out, obviously, but they still want to contend while they develop these guys. And they need a midfielder who can help straight away, because that is an ageing midfield that desperately needs some an injection of energy, of youth. And I think they're going to get that at pick 5. I think any of those kids who fall through, they're going to get exactly that. So, in my opinion, this is the way they're going to order it. Jagger Smith will be taken if he's available. I'm not sure that he'll be available there. Finn O'Sullivan, if he's there. Harvey Langford, they have interviewed a few times in the last couple of weeks, and they've met his family, and they've got to really know him, so they're going to be interested in him for sure.
190-centimetre midfielder. Harvey Langford is the most Melbourne name you've ever heard, isn't it? That's
Out
great.
Of the Stingrays. Sid Draper, and then Bo Allen as a guy who could go as early as probably pick 9 to the Ds. I think they'll be looking at those groups of players at 5 and 9, and then potentially targeting a key forward as well.
That's interesting. So have we talked about Langford before? I mean, can you kind of talk about his sort of style of play?
He took a share in the Lark medal with Leo Lombard. He was just about the most dominant player at junior football level this year. He kicked bags of goals from the midfield. He's that 190-centimetre accumulator. He can extract the ball. He's got a penetrating left leg. I liken him to Jordan Dawson with his ability to kind of get out of the contest and kick. He doesn't have the burst, but he's a quite powerful long-distance runner, so he can get to a lot of contests and rack up the footy in that way. And then his aerial ability is probably the best contested mark for a midfielder in the draft.
And then 79, so that's an interesting one where you're not sure if they'll... what do you see with that? Is that potentially going to be used, or is that just...
They've got 2 NGA prospects they're having a look at. They've nominated them. Okay. Riak Andrew is a 190-centimetre brother of Mac Andrew, who they infamously didn't get access to a couple of years ago. He went to the Suns. The rest is history. But
so a lot shorter than his brother.
Yeah, he is a lot shorter. He does the same defensive kind of work, and he actually had a couple of really good games. One against Job Shanahan that I was at up in Bundoora, where it was a very windy day, admittedly, but he was sensational. Just as a shutdown, lockdown key defender who does his job.
Interesting.
And I think there's probably a space for him on a national draft list or a rookie list this year. He's an overager, so his draft year was last year. He's gone back to the Coates Talent League, and he's performed really well as a 19-year-old. And then Ricky Mentha, who's an Indigenous man from the Northern Territory, who's a small forward. He's got a bag of tricks. He's really, really exciting to watch. He was in the AFL Academy program, so he's been exposed to the elite pathways now, and I think he'll get his shot at some stage. It may be through Melbourne as in the NGA, or maybe another club having a bid on him.
D's, there you go. So North Melbourne are next, Jake. They were 3-20, so 17th, another 3-win season. The signs are okay. They probably could have won a couple more, to be honest, including that Collingwood game we talked about. But there are still some list holes. They've got pick 2, but then after that it's 62, 76 and 86. And we've already spoken about where they're probably going to be looking, and that's key position.
Yeah, I think finding someone to partner Nick Larkey, still only 26, so he's not 29.
Yeah, he's young. Well, relatively.
Finding someone to partner with him, I think, is what they need to do. The trouble is, you got pick 2, and you think there's so many midfielders, a glut of them, and it's like, well, do we take another midfielder? But have they got enough now? You can never have an...
What I'll say, if they take another midfielder, the writing's on the wall for guys like Will Phillips and stuff. They can't get into that midfield.
Yeah. So where they're looking is Alex Tauru, but he's number 9 on your power rankings, and he's potentially going to go pick number 2. What's the thought process there? Is it literally just we need to get the best key position player through the door?
I think they really like him, and I think that his upside is that James Sicily type of Tom Stewart halfback interceptor who can probably partner a Charlie Comben and Will Dawson for the future. Yep. That's probably where they're looking at in their list build.
Are they anticipating he's going to grow a bit more? Because you talk about that 193 centimetre being a bit of an in-between size at times.
It's a tough size, but I had Nate Caddy at 5 last year, and he's only 194 centimetres. He is a bit bigger than Taru, especially through kind of the midriff, but Taru's ability to jump, he's got an incredible leap. He took out the vertical leap in the draft combine. And he's also his ability to run and get up and down the ground. I think he can be an effective key defender at the next level. It would just be a little bit undersized. But I think we've seen a lot of instances of those types actually working. Josh Battle's only 190 centimetres. I think it kind of works if you've got the right.
And you're anticipating him to go back at the Kangaroos?
I think he will at the very least start down back. He flashed some signs up forward, and I think that may be where his future lies as well. But he's a genuine swingman that I think will probably do his best work as an interceptor.
Going back to your point right from the beginning when we were talking about the top end, given that the teams that sit third and fourth are very unlikely to take him, would North be crazy to not try and trade down? Or is there too much risk involved in doing it?
They have looked at it and they've spoken about this. They've even looked to trade into next year if the opportunity arrived.
Well, we talked about the Crows potentially looking at that.
And they've put their future first on the table as well to get back into the draft. And hopefully, if they get pick 7, they could take Alex Taru at that point and also take a midfielder at pick 2. Yeah. So they're looking at all those options. Right now, there's just not as much interest as you expect for pick 2. Yeah. Mostly because the depth of the draft means that these prospects could slide down the order and clubs are wasting.
In previous years, Melbourne at 5 and 9 might will go for 2, but
so
they're happy with 5 and 9.
They would have been put to Harley Reid for sure.
Yeah, it's also dependent on the crop in front. Yeah.
Port Adelaide is next, so obviously lost Dan Houston, but bring in Jack Lukosius, Joe Richards, Rory Atkins. They've got picks 13, 29, 36 and 50 in a bit of limbo because they finished second on the ladder but got smacked in that semi, straight sets. What do you make of Port's list and where you think they can improve?
Not straight sets, prelim.
Apologies, mate, they made the prelim.
I think Port's list is in reasonable shape. I wonder if there's a ruckman that they could target.
Yeah, I think they quite like Dante Visentini in the future. Term? Yeah, I actually do think they quite like him, but for now, I think they're really lacking a ruckman. Jordan Sweet's done a decent job, and Ivan Soldo is going to stick around and hopefully fight for that spot as well. But I don't think that's exactly where they've been looking because they need to prop up this premiership window under Ken Hinkley with guys like Zach Butters and Connor Rosie in their primes and hopefully holding on to the tail end of the Travis Boak kind of era. I think they really want to prop up this window, so they're probably looking for an injection of immediate quality, and that probably comes with some hard-nosed tackling, some drive, some foot skills through the midfield. So I think they should definitely be looking at Cooper Hines, who's this really, really powerful half-forward midfielder who, with Harvey Langford at the Dandenong Stingrays, they were an incredible 1-2 punch, and he could probably go a bit higher than even 13, despite where I have him on my rankings, where the consensus between recruiters actually kind of is, because it only takes one club to really like him, and he's got powerful traits. I think he's probably going to develop more into a Sam Powell-Pepper at half forward instead of being that genuine midfielder. But that's where I would be leaning if I was Port Adelaide. They've been linked to Jack Whitlock, who's one of the twins that I've mentioned before, 200 centimetres, can really high point the ball, and when he's on, he's really on, and he can kick loads of goals as a presenting half forward and also go through the ruck if necessary. That's probably a direct replacement for Charlie Dixon, who's retired.
Sure.
Taj Hotton's in the mix. Joe Berry will also be in the mix as a half forward. I think that's exactly where that stands for pick 13. At pick 29, you may be able to target more need a defender or a ruckman. I think Alex Dodson will be really interesting to them, who was my best ruck this year.
He's a South Australian prospect as well, isn't he?
He is, yeah. He got offered a professional contract from the Adelaide 36ers. That's how good and developed down the line of basketball he was. And he's turned his back on that to go into the AFL draft. I think Port Adelaide will be really interested in him. And then Luke Traynor, who is sliding due to some concussion issues, but I have no reason to believe that he hasn't been medically cleared to be an AFL footballer, and he can't have a fully fit, competitive decade in the system. So
when you talk about concussion at someone like Luke Traynor's age, of course, I remember him being quite high up in your rankings, maybe top 10 at some point even.
Yeah.
How many concussions are we talking?
He's had 4 through his junior career.
Is that a worry?
Has to be a worry.
It has to be a worry about his health. first and foremost before football.
And recruiters and clubs are taking note of that and saying that might be a reason why he slides. Yeah,
absolutely, you have to be these days, especially knowing that you can be medically retired, at any point. We saw that with Aidan O'Driscoll, heartbreakingly, in January last year, where he was taken in the 50s by the Western Bulldogs, but never played an AFL game, which is obviously heartbreaking. I think more with Luke Traynor, he was at the draft combine. He looked really fully fit, healthy, happy, speaking to everyone, had a chat to him, and we were in a very loud environment at MSAC, and he was completely fine. So from that point of view, I don't think that this is going to be an inhibiting issue, and he's knocked all those things back and said that he's good to go. So I'll take his word for that.
Fingers crossed. Moving on from Port Adelaide to Richmond. So obviously, when you talk about draft hands, Jake, doesn't get much better. Obviously, they had to finish last to get it. 2 wins, 21 losses. Lost a lot of star power as well in the off-season, but 1, 6, 10, 11, 18, 20, 23, 24. They have the chance to set themselves up for the next decade.
I love what they've done.
Yeah.
It's just
blow it up.
Yeah. It's what so many other clubs should do, but they refuse to believe that they're in this position. And you know what? It expedites that rebuild. Let's just get as much young talent as we can now, and let's get ahead of the game with it. How do you approach it? Is it a case of just taking best available, or what do you do if you're in Richmond's position here?
Are you listening to calls from other clubs?
Yeah, 100% for those later selections. What they're going to do is I think they're going to take 2 midfielders at 1 and 6. And they're going to swing for upside with those selections. And then they're going to assess the list and what they need, probably a key forward, a key defender, those types to really fill out what they need in the future. Right now, they're in a position where if 2 or 3 of these guys don't play a game in the AFL next year, that's completely fine.
Yeah.
And that's why they'll probably go for guys like Taj Hodden or Noah Mraz, who have missed a lot of footy this year and will take time to develop. At 1, they're going to take Sam Lawler, though.
So talk to us about him, because we touched
really
on him.
Exciting. And fingers crossed, I haven't heard anything, but I'm hoping that Dusty Martin will be presenting the number 4 Guernsey to him on draft night. That would be incredible, because he plays just like him, and I don't want to put the wraps on him too early, but he has this incredible, powerful ability to explode out of contests as a midfielder, but also play as Dusty did as a one-on-one forward and win a lot of marking contests, win the ball at ground level, kick goals in a variety of ways. So he loves a fend off. He loves defensive pressure as well. That's probably where he probably separates himself from a lot of other prospects at the top here. He loves to tackle and compete, and he enjoys the physicality of the game. There's a lot to like about him. We just haven't seen enough of him this year.
Is he a better prospect than Dustin Martin from what we've seen to this point?
Dusty played a hell of a lot more football through his junior career. Sam Lawler, he's played cricket over the summers. He's an incredible cricketer, so he's never done a pre-season. This year, he only played about 6 or 7 games. Okay. And that's across all competitions. In the AFL Academy, didn't play a game. His first game back was for Geelong Grammar, so I don't have any vision of that, unfortunately, but he kicked 7 goals. And then he goes to GWV Rebels and has 34 touches as an inside midfielder, so he can do both. And it's really, really special to see when it all clicks. He had cameos in the championships as a forward. I just want to see him do it more consistently, and that's why I have him at 4 instead of at 1 like Richmond does.
Yep. Sure. So, I mean, when you talk about what Richmond lost in the off-season is where you're looking at, Jack Graham, but Shea Bolton, Daniel Rioli and Liam Baker. So key half-back users there with those last 2. Is there anyone on the list?
Throw Dusty in there as well. They lost maybe 5.
And Dusty as well.
Players.
But when you talk about sort of those sort of positions, maybe not a full-on midfielder, not a key position player, are there guys that can go in and we talk about draftees being at half-back and succeeding right away. Are there any ready-made prospects maybe at that sort of 6, 10, 11, 18 positions you can see the Tigers going after?
Yeah, I think that what they're going to be doing is targeting the midfield of the first 2 picks, and they don't need to start in the midfield, but Sam Lawler will start at half forward, and then the kid that they've really earmarked for pick 6, which will be interesting to see how things develop around them, is Josh Smiley, who's this 195 centimetre inside ball winner who could start at half-back as this tall interceptor. So what I love about him is that he rips the ball out of contests like few else. He's probably the best clearance player in the draft pool. At 195 centimetres, that puts him in that lineage
Bontempelli,
of Cripps, Bontempelli, Tom Green. Those types are the ones to succeed at 190 plus centimetres. I think he could potentially do that. It's just a huge upside swing that the Tigers are taking, which when you look at their draft hand, fair enough.
So talk to us about Smiley for a sec, because he was quite high up on a lot of rankings earlier in the year and has kind of slid back a bit. And it's just on where are the doubts? Is it about whether he's able to translate it to the AFL level?
Really burst onto the scene, but he's physically dominant over smaller kids.
Yeah.
When it comes to coming up against guys his side like a Harvey Langford at the championships, he really struggled to exert his authority in those similar strength matchups in the midfield. He doesn't do enough around the ground aerially at 195 centimetres to make that a mismatch, which I think he really needs to improve. And then going forward, he probably needs to hit the scoreboard a bit more as well.
Okay, so potentially at that 6, maybe 10, but then you've got, we can sort of jump back to Richmond in a sec, but then you've got St Kilda with 7 and 8, and they're keen on him as well. So they'd probably have to look at him with the 6th pick, right?
Absolutely. I think that's really been earmarked because St Kilda is so keen on Smiley. They need to grab him at 6, and then at 10 and 11, target more needs. Joe Berry's one who I think can start at half forward or half back.
He could go as high as 10, you think?
And I think he could go as high as 10 to 15, that kind of range with Fremantle interested and those types of clubs. And his skid probably stops at GLUS at 15, 16.
It's a pretty unprecedented draft haul for it's not a Gold Coast GWS expansion club situation.
It's not far off.
But no, in terms of we haven't seen a club have this much draft capital outside of those two clubs. Certainly not in recent times. So I think the beauty of it is, as I said, it's getting ahead of the game with the rebuild, and you can afford to play these kids. The expectation of course, you don't want to be losing every game by 140 points, but there's no expectation on the Tigers next year. They're not going to be winning games. They weren't winning games this year. So I don't think it matters. To your point, I think you get them in there, they play games, and they develop quicker. I think it's a massive win for the Tigers.
So absolutely. I say towards the back end of their draft hand, but their back end is 20, 23, 24. Any key position prospects, maybe ruck, or where else could they be looking once they've gone for the upswings and got the needs?
I think the successor to Toby Nankervis and Alex Dodson should be considered here. Jasper Alger has been a link to them as a small forward as well. Noel Miraz is a developing key defender. Jonty Fall is a key forward who started the season at number 1 in my key forwards. He fell down the order with a back issue, but he's kicked bags of goals late in the season as well. James Barrett, Jesse Datoli, Tom Sims, who we've already spoken about as that upside swinger as a key forward, and then Angus Clark, I think, is that more steady half-back presence as a 188 centimetre interceptor who's a good lockdown, can go forward, kick goals if need be as well. At 10 and 11, this is where I find it interesting because they're not going to trade out of these picks, in my opinion. So Murphy Reid, Joe Berry, Toby Travaglio, who we'll talk a little bit more about with St Kilda next.
Sure.
I think they're quite in the frame as guys who can play straight away outside of the centre square. So you're going to have Tim Taranto, Jacob Hopper, and maybe one of those drafted midfielders in it from pick 1 or 6. But you need more talent outside of the centre square, and that's where these guys come into the frank. And I believe that Toby Travaglio should be one of those picks if available.
Tigers fans, the write-ups are on all of these kids in Jasper's work on espn.com.au/AFL if you want to have a look and get up to date. St Kilda is next, and we did talk about them, and they've got that 7 and 8 just lingering there between a couple of the Tigers picks, then 32, 47, 80 and 88. And they do kind of need to take a swing, I think, with one of these, because you talk about sort of mediocre seasons, middle-of-the-road seasons, 11 and 12, they finished 12th, just weren't quite good enough to get to finals. And the list it's there. It's okay, but there's the need for X factor. There's need for upswing.
How can it be there and okay? I think the list is.
When I say the list is there, it's there. I'm not saying it's there.
It's there.
Tone is important.
Look, I think it's quite clear for far too long there just hasn't been enough grunt in that midfield. They don't have enough bodies that can go through there and impact.
So Smiley's the guy,
and
right?
I think, maybe he is, but if they're not going to get him, is there a way they can move up? Is it possible for them to move up without dropping the other pick down too far?
They're one team that's had conversations with North Melbourne about moving up, but they don't want to lose both selections. The alternative is going to be staying at 7, splitting pick 8 with a team like GLUS, who has 15 and 16, moving down, grabbing 3 first-round prospects to fill out the list because Ross Lyon's trying to build this list in his vision, and he's inherited a list that needed a lot of work, obviously. So what they're going to do at 7 and 8 really shapes the draft. It's going to be fascinating. I think they take one of the sliding midfielders. That's probably who slides out of O'Sullivan, Jagger Smith, Sid Draper, Harvey Langford, and then Josh Smiley.
So Jagger Smith could fall to.
That's as late as it'll happen, and it's probably as late as that'll happen for any of those midfielders I've just mentioned. St Kilda will stop that slide, and then the other pick, if they don't split it with a GOS type or Sydney, later on in the piece. I think Toby Travalia really suits as this competitive halfback wingman who has more run and dash to him than the St Kilda's probably lacked. With Ross Lyon's game plan, up and back, trying to flood into defence and then get forward on the counter attack is going to be really important. Toby Travalia suits that to a T.
So he sort of moved up your rankings the last couple of months. So he's now into the 7th, so he's well inside the top 10. But it's the first we've sort of talked about him in this podcast.
Well, yeah, because I think his range is probably from that Richmond pick 6 through the St Kilda 2 selections, and then Richmond bookends that.
10, 11.
Yeah. So Melbourne's also in there, but I don't think they'll be targeting him. So that's kind of where I see his range, and it's pretty early for a halfback. He's shown that he can go through the midfield, he can impact up forward as well. But when you watch him, and I highly recommend watching 2 minutes of his highlights, his dogged determination, his competitiveness, his ability to intercept, kickstart transition.
Totally.
He runs up and down like a gazelle. He's unbelievable to watch. He's a guy that just catches your eye immediately with the blonde shock of hair, and he finished second in the 2K time trial at the Combine, so he can really run.
Interesting. Swannies, runners up, pipped in the grand final. Well, more than pipped, but they were pipped in the grand final. But they finished top of the ladder, 17-6. Started really well, Jake. But
they were good all year.
They were good all year.
Best team all year.
They had a little period at the end, but a lot of those games, they were losing them by 2 points, 1 point, 4 points. So,
But yeah, where do you think they need to improve? I think they were maybe caught short a couple of times defensively with depth.
I think key back. I think they probably... Tom McCartan, I'm a big fan of Tom McCartan.
Yeah.
I think he's a really good player. But I think they need a bit more there. You look at the other end of the ground, and we spoke so much, particularly in the final series, about the 3 talls they've got and whether they're going to work. I think they're clearly going to be persisting with them for now. Could any of them potentially play as a defender? Had any of those 3 played any defence in their juniors? Because that's something that I thought about is do they make a change like that and then go else and then take another stab at a forward? Or do they just go safer and look for more defensive stocks? We're
probably a month of poor football away from Logan McDonald being trialled down back, aren't we? That's kind of where his situation is kind of unfolding over the last couple of years. He probably hasn't come on.
It's just not working
as much as Sydney would have hoped, especially for a top 3 pick.
Yeah.
You look at the key position talent available, and this is probably where it comes into play at 19 and 22 late on that first night. So they should be looking at the Whitlock twins. Matt Whitlock, I think, has that upside as a key defender who's really rangy, spoils, knows when to intercept, and loves having a task and shutting down an opponent. He'll take time, though, because these guys are quite rangy. Noah Mraz will be in that frame. Harry O'Farrell as well. James Barrett, who's probably the more ready-made prospect, more like a Josh Battle at 190 centimetres. They're relying on Dane Rampy way too heavily down back still at 34, 35 years of age. So I think it's something they really need to address.
Yeah, so the Swans, as you say, 19, 22, so those are the first night potentially picks. Then 44, 59, 85 and 91. So they'll have a couple of swings there, I guess, to kind of look. Any academy or anything to look out for later in the draft for the Swans?
No, not for them this year. Joel Cochran is one that should or maybe attract a national draft bid. There's every chance that he makes it through to their Cat B rookie list as an academy prospect, but that's about it for the national draft.
Fair enough. From the Swans to the West Coast Eagles, so they'll have picks 12 and 26, and then a bit of a gap to 72, 77, 87 and 92. So a lot of back-end sort of stuff there. 16th, they were 5 and 18, so they improved a little bit and showed a little bit of what we could expect in future years.
Showed a little bit.
But there's still obviously some spots where they need to shore up.
Yeah, I think there's still kind of like a couple of teams we've spoken about, still plenty of holes on the list. As we said with Collingwood and Nick Dacos, and I think you mentioned it with the Giants and Tom Green, I think they need to find a running partner for Harley Reid for the next 10 plus years and lock those 2 guys down. Know that every game they're going to be at the centre bounce, and that's what they've got to find. I don't know who that might be, where they're picking.
Well, Harley Reid was good friends with someone that's been on your power rankings quite high up as well and may slide to that pick at 12.
Yeah, well, Toby Travalia is one of his best mates out of the Bendigo Pioneers, and he actually beat Harley Reid to the Pioneers' best and fairest last year in the Coates Talent League as an underager. I think pick 12 is probably a touch late for him. That's where the slide would stop. They're really interested in what Toby Travalia can bring. There was a lot of talk about the local kid Bo Allen when they slid back from pick 3. But I don't think that's exactly who they had in mind. I think it was more Travalia, Xavier Lindsay, who has that balanced midfield type, who has a beautiful left boot. He's a bit like Errol Goulden with the ability going forward, and he can play on a wing, go into the midfield, rotate it to half back, all of that kind of stuff, which I think will be really valuable for a team like West Coast who needs help on the inside and the outside. as well.
How valuable would it, is it, or how important should it be, I guess, to go after someone that might be, that is a close friend of Harley? Like, if we talk about we don't want him to leave, we want him to stay at the club, we don't want him to go home.
Or the Matt Rowell, Noah Anderson.
Yeah, it's like, wouldn't you be, if you're 50-50 on two players, wouldn't you sort of lean towards the guy that he's friends with and has a relationship with?
100%, and that's what I think Gold Coast did really well with Matt Rowell and Noah Anderson. That's worked quite well for them over the last 5-6 years.
Yeah.
Harley Reid needs to stay in Perth, and they need to make sure that happens.
And they need to do pretty much anything they can. Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
Was it also Lockie Neal, and when the Lions brought in Lockie Neal, they brought in Lincoln McCarthy as one of his great mates as well. So there's method to the madness, right?
Yeah.
So that's potentially something you could do.
Look at Giannis's brothers, bloody playing in the NBA for years.
But later on in the draft, they'll have a couple of goes. So they obviously lost Tom Barris and they lost Jack Darling. So maybe some key position depth there.
Yeah, I think they've been linked to a few talls, and they're probably earlier in the bracket, not 26, which I would be absolutely shocked if they went with a tall at pick 12. But that is what clubs are talking about, and there's a genuine possibility. They're going to have the Hawthorns' future first on the table to get back in on the first night. They may even package it with their future second round pick. So that could be, pick 16 and pick 20 to get back into at pick 15 to 20 in this draft. That's how special this kind of depth is on the first night.
That is interesting.
So I think that they target a key forward like a Jack Whitlock, Job Shanahan, if they got back in, but not with pick 12. I do think it's a bit of a travesty that they've landed at pick 12 and 26. After the 3 years that they've had to not have a top 3-5 pick on their list except for Harley Reid, I think is absolutely ridiculous. So trading back to get Liam Baker, I think, has really cost them Finn O'Sullivan, who was keen to move west and who is a good mate of Harley Reid. He's in that top 5 bracket, obviously. So they've probably shot themselves in the foot there. They're at the mercy of a lot of other clubs at pick 12 to what they're actually going to end up with.
So keep an eye on what the Eagles do on draft night. There might be some phone calls and something to look forward to there. Fair enough. And the last club, Western Bulldogs. So they finished 6th, 14-9. Recovered pretty well from their start as well, but then lost in that elimination final. Picks 17, 25, 35, 48, 83, and 90. Jake, what are you thinking for the Dogs?
Well, no Bailey Smith. No Jack McRae.
Yeah.
And you go back a couple of years, Caleb Daniel, go back a couple of years ago, the midfield took a hit when Josh Dunkley left. I think they've just been losing so many players out of that midfield, and we go back to when, don't have to go back to 2016, but halfway back to there, and we looked at them, they had so many that they couldn't fit them all in. Now it feels like they don't have enough.
Yeah.
And we know we've spoken about how much reliance there's been on Tom Liberatore and Marcus Bontempelli. So I think probably finding Sanders last year, I don't know how you assessed his first season.
He got a bit unlucky, I think, being forced out of that team, being made the sub a fair bit. I think he could have played in a different role, but I think they've really earmarked him to be a midfielder of the future. And if Tom Liberatore is playing there, Ed Richards, Adam Treloar, Bont, it's hard to crack that inside midfield rotation, and they made him play VFL, which is fair enough. Yeah.
So I don't know if that's where they're probably looking. Libba, obviously, he's had his concussion issues. Ola as well, Treloar. I think the midfield, it's a strong midfield. I think Ed Richards is a name I'd sort of forgotten about. I think he was very good when he went in there.
Yep.
But I don't know if that's probably where, I think key position stocks there, you wouldn't
They've
need
been
to be
blessed
touching.
over the last few years through the NGA, through father-sons. Luke,
I don't think they need to be worrying about that. I think it's probably getting more players that can probably go through the midfield.
So at that 17 range, where could they be looking?
They've been linked to a couple half forwards and midfielders a bit later in the piece with 25-35. So I think at 17, Cooper Hines is one that I touted to Port Adelaide. He's also got links to the Western Bulldogs, so I think we'll be really interested in him. Ollie Hannaford's one that I want to raise here is probably my biggest bolter of the draft pool late in the season. Tarouk probably rose up halfway through the year. Hannaford's come with a bullet in the last month of the year where he moved from half back to half forward.
He missed out on. He didn't even go to the combine.
He didn't even get a draft national combine invite. He went to the state combine.
Yep.
And you only need 5 or 6 clubs to register interest to get to the national combine. There's about 70, 80 kids who go along. So that's how far back he's come from 80 plus to, and now I think he's probably a top 25 pick on the first night, and the Western Bulldogs is where his range probably starts at 17, along with GWS with those 3 first rounders. He's a guy who can take a mark, his competitiveness, he's a little bit like Cody Waitman with his ability in the air, but then also at ground level to kick goals in a variety of ways. I think he's a lot of fun. I think he's going to be a fan favourite. Hopefully he ends up at a place where he can play early on, because he's going to be one to really watch next year.
Fair enough. And just making sure they've got no more key position or father sons or academy prospects to come through this season.
Stunningly, they do not. A couple midfielders at 25 and 35. I think Christian Moraes, who was probably higher on my list earlier in the season, has slid down, but he has the ability to add something as an outside midfielder. And then Hugh Boxall has come with a bullet from WA, who's this big 190cm inside midfielder who can run like the wind. He did about a 6-minute 2K, which was incredible at the state combine in WA. And I think that he's a decent chance at 35 for the Dogs.
Like I said, Jake, there's a lot of content on espn.com.au/AFL. Jasper has been all over it this season.
He's doing,
and there's more to come.
Yeah, there is. No, he always does fantastic work, and obviously it's going to continue right up till draft night and
beyond.
on the night we're going to have a live blog on draft night this year and all sorts of other fun stuff. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Yes, we've got the full final Phantom Draft as well popping up in the next couple of days. Probably for draft day. So keep an eye out for that. You can have a look at where Jasper thinks everything will be heading at on Wednesday night. Of course, after that, we'll look at the best prospects for next year as well, an early look, and we'll rate the draft halls and all that kind of stuff. So plenty to come. Keep an eye out on the website, as I said. Jasper, thank you so much for coming in.
No, always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Chat with us about draft, and we look forward to continuing to read your stuff on the website. Anything else we need to do before we sign off? I've forgotten what to do. How do I sign off?
Are we going to do a post-draft episode? Or?
TBA. No, I think just the yarns will probably do it, right?
Okay.
We'll see how we go. Maybe. Keep an eye out.
That sounded like it was announced.
No, to everybody at home, thank you so much for tuning in. Might have some special stuff coming in the off-season, though.
We do. I've got to make a few phone calls after this.
Mount Rushmore 2.0?
Something fun.
Yes, we'll keep everyone up to date on the Twitter, so at Footy Tips on X or Twitter, whatever you call it. But we'll speak to you in the next episode, whenever that may be.